Hello and welcome. Well, this week we're back in the Starship Europrise in Strasbourg for the biggest intergalactic bun fight. Now, I have to tell you, this really does feel like the original Star Trek. It's a 5-year mission to explore strange new policies, seeking new member states and going boldly, quite frankly, where no MEP should ever have to go. But puns aside, there is no doubt that this place really is the centre of global gravity. Time stands still whilst we wait to see what the EU does next. And back in Westminster, of course, they've been terribly unhelpful. John Bercow been doing impressions. Parliament voted not to vote, and then they did vote, but they voted not to vote in the time they'd actually been given to vote. And of course, the Prime Minister then asked for an extension, sort of, by sending 2 letters, one requesting an extension and the second saying, well, actually, ignore my first letter. So what on earth is going on? We're meant to be leaving in 6 days, but are we? This is BrexBox. Well, joining me on the bridge this week, we have Alex Phillips, Belinda de Lucy, Robert Lowe, and my very special guest indeed, Barrister Benjamin Wrench. Well, shall we start? I think we're all exhausted, actually. The last 7 days...
You're so exhausted, you called Rupert Robert.
It's Robert.
Did I?
I know I'm a mix of Robert and Rupert, but you know.
Well, obviously far better looking than Roland. It's been an extraordinary few days, 7 days, I think. You know, what's your take so far on, you know, just the twists and turns? Belinda, do you want to kick off?
Well, I really don't blame people for feeling utterly exhausted and fed up, but for me, it can't be about Brexit because Brexit hasn't even been implemented yet. People are exhausted by the democratic crisis we've been living through, especially the last couple of weeks, the constitutional crisis we've been living through. People are exhausted, and I get that people want to move on. But of course, what I'm worried about is we move on in a way that we don't ever move on, and we're in vassalage for years, and we'll come on to that later. But it's about trust at the moment. Trust for me is such a huge issue. And Nigel, I met him when I was 19, over 20 years ago, and he has stayed true to his word for 25 years. When the Tories were selling us out on Maastricht, Nigel stayed firm. When Labour was selling us out on Lisbon, Nigel stayed firm. And even though he was ridiculed at the beginning, you know, he was proven right again and again and again. So when he talks about this deal, when he talks about the chaos we are in at the moment, my trust is with him.
OK, I'll come on to the deal in a minute, but Rupert, let's go just talk through what's happened. You know, Belinda's right. You know, we had a vote. Everyone said they'd respect it. They haven't respected it. People at home want it done. And the worry is they've had so much of this. There is so much fatigue. And they just think, just get on with it. We'll vote for anything.
Well, I think that's true. Everybody in the country is tired of Brexit. And I think we all want to see it satisfactorily put to bed and then move on. But I think what has happened, and this is, I think, very interesting, is that the country can now see how incompetent Westminster is, not just the elected politicians, but also the unelected politicians in the form of the civil servants. I think Cameron and Blair, between them, their selection processes for the House of Commons are now coming back to bite us. There is a degree of incompetence that is now clear for everybody to see. I think everybody used to be a little bit in awe of Parliament. It's now been televised, so that's lifted one veil. And I think now Brexit's lifted the other veil, and we can actually see that these people are totally unfit for purpose. Whether or not we've got Brexit fatigue, what we have got is a serious problem with our government in that they are largely made up of average people who are pretty incompetent.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, Alex, it's just watching Parliament. If there's one good thing that's come out of this, the electorate have been gripped by the antics in Parliament, just thinking, you know, this is an asylum full of lunatics.
Well, you know, this is interesting because what Boris Johnson has managed to do is make it people versus Parliament. Actually, it was that anyway, so he hasn't managed to do that. That's what he's walked into and tried to put himself on the side of the people. But he is Parliament. He's acting exactly the same as his predecessors. He's brought back the same deal. And you're talking about gripped. It's like watching a horror movie when you as the audience know that this is the bad guy and he's about to sneak through the front door with a massive axe and you're like, I can't look, I've got to look away, and your heart's thumping. That is how I have felt this last week, because if I was terrified ink was going to dry on that thing, terrified, because I know how awful it is, how awful. And a few months ago, Boris was dancing on its grave And now he's bringing it back and saying it's a wonderful new deal, and we know what it's going to do, how it's going to impact us. And I was literally thinking, I'm not even exaggerating this, in my darkest moments when I was lying in bed at night and couldn't sleep, I was thinking, if that treaty's signed, I just don't want to go back to the UK.
Yeah.
I'll leave. Like, I can't have my country become what it will become under that treaty.
What I think is extraordinary is the way the government and Boris is trying to ram this through. The fact is, he unveiled it, gave them 2 days, wanted them to vote, and we know that actually the wording, and we'll come on to Ben in just a minute, but the wording is crucial. How on earth can you really scrutinise that in that time?
Well, this bill is what I call 95% vassalage. Boris described it as vassalage. It's actually, this is a bit better, but it's 95% vassalage. I think if we sign that deal, long term we're toast. But in the short term, it's a bit like lancing a boil. It gets rid of all of the pent-up frustration that the British people have had for so long. But in the long run, we are going to repent at leisure, because it is such a bad deal. And Benjamin can no doubt tell us, he is our legal eagle.
He is.
He's been analysing this extremely in depth, and he's got some great things to say about it. But for me, I do not want to be hanging on the word of the little Napoleon Macron, which we are at the moment, waiting to see how long our extension is. I don't want to be a vassal state. I want to be a proud, sovereign nation run by people whose interests are aligned with ours.
Absolutely.
Ours, the people, and we are the people. The Brexit Party is the people.
And we're the only ones standing up for people.
We're the only people who are giving people an option to vote for real people.
And we have no reason to spin. We have no reason to lie. We haven't got Remainers that we have to please and a party we need to keep together. We have been honest from the start, and as long as Parliament kept Remain on the table and were working with the EU, we were never going to get a fair deal.
No.
So when Boris promised us he'd walk away when his offer was rejected, he didn't. He conceded and conceded at the last minute. So I don't understand why he's putting his party before
He broke his
country.
own red lines, didn't he?
All of them. And you know, Belinda's right. There's this narrative going around now that the Brexit Party is opposing this deal because it'd be the end of the Brexit Party. We want the end of the Brexit Party. We had lives before. We've got things to go back to. And actually, we don't care if we have to work round the clock, if we have to take flack. We don't care if in the next month people call us liars or, you know, say that we've been defeated.
Or we lose Brexit support.
We will stand firm because we're the only people not lying. We are not lying.
But I mean, I think, you know, we watched those votes go through the House of Commons, and I will come on to you, Ben, I promise. We watched those votes go through, and the fact they voted it through, this deal, but actually, in some ways, I was so pleased that actually Parliament woke up and realised they needed more time to scrutinise, and that, for me, was the only saving grace.
Well, I keep saying it's like a piece of cheese. You'd leave it out the fridge for long enough and it starts to honk. And that's why he was pushing it through at breakneck speed, which even the most simple legislation doesn't get signed off and all through the entire passage in 3 days. It's such abject, obvious connery.
And it's surrendering to bullying.
It's
How dare they
abject.
corner us so we have to sign a bad
it's
deal?
so
That's
obvious
not
what he's trying
honourable,
to do.
putting your name to that.
And it's a
Well, the
disgrace.
irony, David, is that, of course, Oliver Letwin probably saved the day for us.
Yes,
In
weirdly.
that I think on Saturday, Boris was known by his school friends as the greased albino piglet, because nobody could ever catch hold of his lock, you know, because it was greased, and he seems to get away. He seems to be able to get away with things other people can't. But actually, we on Saturday, I think, did face quite a grave situation in that I think all this haste is bad news, as we know with the Maastricht Treaty. You know, I stood for the referendum party in '92 to save the pound, in '97 to save the pound. At the end of the day, this is the same. We cannot rush legislation through. 600 pages. The political declaration has got the word should in it 126 times. In Europe, they're totally different to us culturally. In Europe, unless the law says you can do something, you assume you can't. In Anglo-Saxon Britain, unless the law says you can't do something, you assume you can.
Yeah.
And that is the fundamental difference between us and Europe. And to put our head into the lion's jaw, and we can go on and talk about the AFCO meeting on Monday where I asked Barnier some questions.
Yes.
But we are putting ourselves in peril. And our people need to know that. And I have great belief in the British people. I think they're great judges of character. And I don't think we should underestimate the good judgment, not of the people in Westminster. They're almost part of Europe. What we have is proper English people who care, or British people who care about Britain.
Okay, this is a very good time to bring in our brainy barrister from Brussels, Ben. Ben, I think part of this is fatigue, but also I don't think people at home understand what this deal, this new European treaty really says. Because the spin is, oh, it's all fine, basically we'll go into a transition, we'll have a nice free trade agreement, it'll all be lovely and roses and petals. What, as a barrister, you've been through this a lot, in great detail. What's
Painfully.
the top line? What do you want people at home to understand about this deal?
Well, I suppose often it's been said that Brexit is about getting back our laws, money and borders. And as a lawyer, obviously, laws are fairly high on my list of things I'd like to repatriate. And it was in the first line of the Withdrawal Act in 2018 that we'd be repealing the European Communities Act 1972 on exit day, which we know has drifted, but the sentiment was there. And that's the statute that applies decisions of the ECJ to British courts and British laws. And so since the publication in 2018 of that statute, ostensibly setting out how we're going to leave, I've been dying to see what has finally been published this week, which was the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. And lo and behold, in the first section of that, it speaks about the previous repeal that we're going to have, and then says, but save for. And then during the transition, we are going to have the ECJ oversight of all our laws again.
So just to clarify this, so basically we pay £39 billion. We think that we're free, but actually we're under the jurisdiction of the ECJ, the European Court of Justice.
Well, I'm going to correct you on the 39 billion.
Oh, you think it's more?
Well, it's one of those, it's become trite to say, oh, we're paying 39 billion, but actually the withdrawal treaty doesn't give a specific figure. No. It just sets out a mechanism by which Barnier can work out how much we should pay. And if we dispute that, then our appeal is to the ECJ. So
it's a bit like playing a game of football against a team, and then if you think that there's something you want to look at again, you basically ask the team captain of the other side.
Yeah,
right. Okay.
But it's worse than that, because in the political declaration, which sets out what our future trading relationship agreement might look like, Boris has in paragraph 131 conceded that the ECJ will govern that as well. And that's almost unheard of in trade agreements.
And it has a bite, doesn't it? People at home, and certainly I did at the beginning, was taken in by the whole rhetoric around, oh, it's just a political declaration. It's not binding. Don't worry about it. We can sort it out later. But there is an article in the Withdrawal Act that actually gives it a lot of bite. They connect the two.
Yes, it's. I think amongst conservative circles, it's been suggested that we can leave at the end of 2020 and maybe do so without a deal. Even though there's Article 184 in the Withdrawal Treaty, which obliges us to use our best endeavours to reach the free trade agreement which is set out in the political declaration. And we have one opportunity to extend the period in which to make that treaty, a new free trade treaty, and that comes in the middle of next year. But at that point, we decide whether we would wish to extend by a year or two. Now, by the middle of next year, there's no chance that there's going to be a free trade agreement. And so to demonstrate that we're using our best endeavours, we will have to extend. And Barnier has been very clear that he expects an agreement to take 3 years or more.
He said minimum 3 years,
yes.
Didn't he? Yeah.
And so it's inevitable, I think, at that point in the middle of next year, to demonstrate our best endeavours to reach this agreement.
What are our best endeavours? That sounds very legal speak.
Well, you can ask the ECJ, because they'll tell us.
What are our best endeavours?
And that's the answer to all these questions, is that if we're in dispute, then it's the ECJ that decides, even after the transition period.
That's the bit people don't get, even after the transition period.
Yeah.
Can I make a point about this transition period? People keep saying transition period, so people at home think it's that period of time where businesses get used to what happens next.
Yeah.
It isn't. Transition period is continued full membership. We're still paying in, and we're still subject to whatever they decide here, whatever they decide, but there will not be a single UK representative. It's continued membership, but without anyone at the top table, any MEPs, nothing. I mean, we don't want to be here, but But the point is this: during the period where we're supposed to be negotiating with our best endeavours this free trade agreement, the EU could invent whatever. They can just put into our statute whatever they want to harm us, and they will. They will say we want to tax the City of London. They will come up with all these policies, and it will be the sword of Damocles. So when we're saying, oh, we don't want to do it this way, the free trade deal, we don't want to have taxation harmonisation with you, they'll say, well, we might just tax the City of London tomorrow, by the way, and what do you think about that? Their foot will be on our neck.
You're so right, Alex, and this comes to the point on Monday when I was at the Brexit committee, the AFCO committee, where I actually specifically asked Barnier, who appeared. It was in camera because they didn't want it filmed, so the questions weren't actually, as usual in this place, available for everybody to then download and look at. It was in secret. So I actually said to him, what guarantees, if the British government signed this treaty, what guarantees have we got that you will not abuse your position of power, which you will have over us, as Benjamin has just outlined? And he didn't give me an answer. So he also talked about the cost of divorce. There is a price for divorce. He talked about our geographical proximity to Europe.
So you're saying he sort of likened it to a marriage, saying you pay, you're divorcing us.
You have to pay. You get divorced,
pay the price.
You pay. And also, he said, geographically, we're close. We've got a big economy. We're more of a threat geographically than, say, Canada or other more distant countries. He actually said these things at the committee. So this is a terrible deal, and the British people need to reflect on it. Now, I'm confident. I'm confident that as time goes by, this thing, that the loose ends are going to get picked apart. People are going to try and put amendments onto it. And I think, as I said earlier, we do owe Oliver Letwin a bit of a vote of thanks, actually, because he stopped the momentum, trying to ram this thing through too quickly without proper scrutiny. And I think now there is a serious chance that we, the Brexit Party, can actually make people understand, and common sense will prevail. I
want to come back. So we've talked about ECJ, the fact they have supremacy. Let's talk about trade, because one of the things we've been told, we can have our own trade policy. There's some of your legal language in this, isn't there? Well, level playing field.
Yes.
What's that mean?
We can have our own trade policy, but of course, international trade deals are the leverage to achieve them are either reducing tariffs or adjusting what they call non-tariff barriers, so your internal regulations that restrict business activity, adjusting those to make them flexible enough to invite business from other countries. And of course, the EU, having quite a penchant for harmonisation, is very keen on regulation. And during, not just during the transition, will they be ratcheting up the level playing field so that regulations become more difficult, possibly for businesses which are particularly conducted in the UK. But the political declaration which we signed up to envisages that the free trade agreement that follows the transition will oblige us to maintain those regulatory standards. So we won't be able to reduce them to encourage trade deals with third countries.
So you're essentially saying they're tying our hands behind our back?
Yes.
No one wants to, I mean, we might be able to technically be able to trade with people, but no one, not even the smallest little island nation will want to trade with us because we won't have anything to offer. And like Ben was saying, I mean, look, the level playing field sounds innocuous, doesn't it? Oh, it sounds like fairness. Oh, we've all got to be fair. We've all got to keep the same standards. If this place decides corporation tax must go up to, across the union, 30%, and we're like, well, we want to attract business because we want to have, robotics in Europe. We want to maintain car manufacturing here. We want to, whatever it is. All of a sudden, if we have to then whack up corporation tax to 30%, everyone will leave. And they want, for a long time, they have been so grotesquely jealous of the City of London, especially, from having financial services, which is a huge input into our economy. However much of a bad name banking gets, make no mistake, if banking flees the UK, we lose a massive chunk of our economy. And they are so desperate, they always have been, to tax it. And they say in this chamber all the time, don't they? We don't want Singapore on Thames. Their biggest fear is to have a strong United Kingdom with a flourishing economy trading with the world. And they don't just want to prevent that, they actually want to weaken us to such a point we're dust.
Which is why they love the treaty, which is exactly why they want us to sign the treaty. And it's a warning. If the EU love it, if they want us to sign it, it's not going to be fair. It's going to be a terrible
Can I just ask you, so we've heard about the supremacy of the ECJ, the fact we can't do our own trade deals, the fact we can't...
Well, we can do our own trade deals.
Okay.
But it's a question of how we entice other countries to come to a good deal. So
Sounds
That's the thing,
very
you can open a shop.
lawyery.
You
Yeah,
can open a shop,
yeah.
you can't put
So
any
I have
produce
to-
in it,
Yeah.
Right.
basically.
Well,
Yes.
we can reduce tariffs, and that's Boris's achievement. We won't be in their customs union, but because of the level playing field, we won't be able to adjust the non-tariff barriers that make it worthwhile for third countries to do business with us rather than with other countries.
Why would we sign this?
Yeah, why
Good
are we
question.
signing
Good
it?
question. Well put.
Right, okay, good.
Good question.
Well,
Well
let's-
put.
Thank you. Well, let's go on to fishing. June Mummery, one of our colleagues, she's livid. I mean, that's an understatement, isn't it? And Boris says, well, we're taking back control of our own waters.
Well, Macron has other plans for us. I think he's got fishing just here ready to pounce on us during a free trade agreement, and it is a bargaining chip. And for people talk about quotas, it's not just about quotas. These massive trawlers are digging up our seabeds. They're coming within 6 miles of our coastal areas. These poor fishermen who have smaller boats, the smaller family businesses, they're not even going to be able to break even. It's about net hole sizes. All these laws and regulations have been killing off our smaller fishing. We're an island and we cannot support a fishing industry. And it is because of both UK and EU policy. We get that, but my God, they had this chance to have their voice heard. And we as the Brexit Party have their backs. None of the other parties have their backs, and we cannot let them down.
This is the doublespeak of everything in that document, because in one paragraph in the political declaration it says the UK will have its own seas again. Then next it says, but the EU will have access to them
And it's
will
non-discriminatory.
operate all the quotas.
Yeah.
Right.
It's utter, the
So it's
whole
completely
thing.
contradictory.
During the transition period, nothing changes in fishing apart from we have no say or influence over the rules. Then after the transition, the political declaration envisages access to quotas, access to waters rather, and quota shares on a non-discriminatory
basis.
Yeah.
This is
As
key.
it is already, and as the EU decides, and the ECJ will be the final arbiter.
and that's code. That is
As in
code.
factor tame.
That's code
Factor
for,
tame,
well, actually, factor tame is very interesting because there's another paragraph, 29 in the political declaration, which regulates investment and into the UK and requires it to be on a non-discriminatory manner. So that's effectively freedom of establishment coming back in, and it's that which was the real problem in factor tame, because although in the Merchant Shipping Act 1988, the Conservative government under Margaret Thatcher tried to ensure that British quotas would be owned by British citizens. Freedom of establishment and the non-discriminatory manner in which investment in the UK had to be treated meant that statute couldn't prevent foreign buyers purchasing the quota which of course they did.
Yeah.
And under the political declaration and the future free trade agreement, which Boris envisages signing, exactly the same situation will arise. That we won't be able to ensure that British quotas are owned by British fishermen.
I just want to touch on one other point, which is, one of our greatest assets, which is our military. Again, we have no independence. Correct?
It's
Well,
scarier than that.
I think
It's-
it's absolutely great
it's-
you brought that up, because I think that's a really major issue for me.
It's a nuanced point. As a lawyer, I'm used to nuanced points. So until the end of the transition, if the EU makes a foreign policy decision in Council, we are by Article 129, subparagraph 6 of the Withdrawal Treaty, obliged not to impede the EU policy. And that obligation continues even after the
What does
transition
impede
period.
mean?
Ask the ECJ.
They'll
Yes,
interpret
see,
it for you.
round we go again.
All roads lead to the
All
ECJ.
roads come back here, yeah.
And it's because it encompasses foreign policy. Obviously now the EU is developing into having a military arm to that. Where this will actually have an impact, I think, is we won't see it so much. It'll be quite deep inside the civil service, where they will consider what options they can put forward to ministers in their either contingency planning or to provide them with reaction to certain events. And the civil service is not allowed to offer to a minister something which is illegal under international law. So They will naturally be cautious because they probably in those circumstances can't go to the ECJ to ask them out in public.
So just tell me why, I mean, obviously there are a lot of lawyers involved in all of this. Why are the public being persuaded by the government?
Because I think because May's deal was so horrific. Wasn't it Barnier that said about May's deal, it looked more like a country wanting to join the EU. I mean, it was so horrific.
So this is
that
just a less bad
Well,
deal.
this is it. Just because it's... But Boris has achieved a couple of things. You know, thanks to the Brexit Party, we played a huge part in bettering the deal, but there's no need to sign a deal that puts us at so much risk because we've been cornered and bullied. People are signing it out of fear of no Brexit rather than based on its merits. And that is not going to... That's not going to instill trust in the deal. It's going to unravel. We need an election. We need to change the seats and negotiate Brexit from a position of strength. Surely our country deserves that.
Absolutely right, Belinda. And I think people shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this is the Tory party doing what is necessary to save themselves. They've run the country so badly for the last 30 or 40 years. They've given away our sovereignty. They're now proposing, in order to save their own skins, to sign a deal that's not fit for purpose. So I don't think any of us should be in any doubt as to why we're even looking at this treaty. As Belinda says, Theresa May made a terrible job of, if you like, leaving Boris batting 6 down. And Boris has made a bit of an improvement, but it's still a terrible deal. And it's slipping away from him because ultimately, as scrutiny comes in, he's also going to suffer from the voting because there's John Mann who goes up to the House of Lords. That's one person who always votes with the government who hates Jeremy Corbyn. You've then got basically the issue of John Bercow if he leaves, because he's threatening not to leave now, which would be an absolute disaster. If he leaves, there's potentially another vote against the government, and then we don't quite know what's going to happen with the reappointment of the Speaker. So again, this is a crucial, very close vote, and these are votes that are slipping away. So we just need to make sure that we continue to tell people what we really think. And unlike the Tory party, we put country before party, as we've always said.
Never buckle. On principle, we need to stand by our principles. There are so few principled politicians left.
I'm bursting to make 3 points. They're just in my head. So first of all, I want to go back to the military thing because we were all addressed by Veterans for Britain yesterday.
Yes, who were fantastic.
These are some of the most experienced people from the security services, from our military, who have seen everything from the inside. They're age, that sounds awful, doesn't it? No, but they're really experienced men. And they said something that sent chills down my spine. They said, first of all, we are in the EU the most important country geopolitically. And then they said that what the EU wants to do by shackling us to their military and defence strategy is essentially remove our position from the UN Security Council. We will have no defence, military, foreign policy, independence. If the EU says, you know, we can't go to war or we must go to war, I mean, that is terrifying. Terrifying.
I don't think they can tell us that we must go to war.
Well, no, but if we can't impede them, we have to stay in step. They can't say we must go to war, but if we can't do anything...
There's a difference between inactivity and action against them. So it's true to say, though, of course, people will question why we are a permanent member of the UN Security Council, because imagine the scenario. The French, as another permanent member of the Security Council, make a proposal, and there are only 5 members, there's still only 5 permanent members of the Security Council. Others join the Security Council on a rotational basis. But so say the French make a proposal in relation to Iran, maybe. If that policy decision is made in the EU Council before the end of the transition, we would be obliged not to veto that in the UN Security Council. And whilst, of course, the Americans might exercise their veto, other countries around the table, relying on the permanent members of the Security Council to use their veto, might well be asking, why are we bothering to have the...
Did you have 2 quick points? I do have to wrap this up.
Well, the other thing is, look, at the end of the day, we're talking about a deal and transition. This is a treaty, and once it's signed, it is what exists for futurity. It's not just take this step now to save the Tories. This is our nation's future, and we're being put in a cage.
We definitely are, and I think all of us are united in the fact, and I think you said it very eloquently, this is about putting country before party, and we have to do everything we can to stop this going through. Ben, just very quickly, just so people understand at home, if, as a lawyer, if this was a house and you've been advising me on all the problems in it. Would you buy the house? Or are you going to give me a legal answer?
It's always a political choice, isn't it, whether to sign up to something. But if you're signing up to something where the other side are going to decide what it means afterwards, you have to really think about it more than twice.
I think we all take that as a no. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Well, sadly, that is all we have time for this week. One big question hangs heavy in the vortex of time and space. What now is our trajectory? Will we be beamed back to Britain, or will we be sucked into another bureaucratic black hole? Who knows, and who dares speculate? There is an old saying, though: a smart person knows what to say, and a wise person knows whether or not to say it. For now, from the bridge of Starship Europrise, goodbye.